Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our presentation on how to become a pilot. We're going to go ahead and wait about 5 minutes and let some more people join us. It looks like folks are joining quickly, so shouldn't take too long, but we'll get started here in just a minute. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It looks like we got a good group of people here, so I'm sure some more will join us as we go ahead. But let's start off with a couple of quick introductions. First off, my name is Josh Harnagle, and I'm the VP of Marketing for Redbird Flight Simulations. But I'm also a CFI, double I, and an MEI, and I've helped a lot of people become a pilot. I've done a lot of training, both as a full-time CFI and then also working with our flight school that Redbird used to run in San Marcos, and a management position, and helping other flight schools provide training and doing some consulting work. I also have some great folks on the line or on this call here that are going to help provide us with a little bit of perspective. So first I want to introduce Eric Crump. Eric, if you're on, can you go ahead and unmute yourself, turn your video on. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Hey, everybody.
Eric, I'll let you go ahead. Well, first, Eric's he's a customer of ours. He's also a good friend. He's a great guy.
I like that you put him in that order. He's a customer and a great friend.
Well,
it's not the other way around. Don't want to give anybody the wrong idea.
Got to pay the bills. So Eric's a CFI, and he runs Polk State, the aerospace program at Polk State. So Eric, go ahead and give a little welcome introduction.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's cool to be here. I like talking about this because at one point I didn't know the answer to this question, and that's why I'm here, to try to help some other people find the path into piloting. I started flying when I was 13. It was an incentive from my parents to probably keep me out of jail. I was not a very good student at the time, and sold it on my 16th birthday. Got my private certificate 2 months after my 18th birthday, and I've never looked back. Went through the whole flight training thing. Currently hold the commercial pilot, single multi-engine, and CFI, CFII. Done a lot of instructing on the ground and in the air in one-on-one environments through flight schools, and now I get the awesome privileges of running a collegiate flight training department. So really cool, and go Redbird, Team Redbird.
All right. We also have.
He's actually paying me to say that, guys. Just so you know, I had to say.
No, he paid to be able to say that. If
I literally paid to be on this webinar.
All right. So also have Joey. Joey Colleran is on the call as well, and she's Joey. Are you available?
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
There she is. Joey works for Redbird, runs our customer success program, but she's also a private pilot. Joey, go ahead and introduce yourself. Talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Like Josh said, I am a private pilot. I have my seaplane rating as well, and I've been, in the aviation industry for about 20 years in one way, shape, or form or the other. And I'm just glad to, be with Redbird and support y'all and answer some questions on what flight training's like, and just somebody that's just a private pilot and no plans to do anything more than that.
All right, great. So what the plan here is, we're going to kind of walk through the the whys, the hows, give you kind of an overview of what it takes to become a private pilot, and the idea was to provide a couple of perspectives. So Eric's got a institutional training background, so training pilots primarily for career flying. Most of my flying instruction background is actually more recreational pilots or pilots flying for business, or that kind of experience. And then we have Joey on the call, who can provide a little bit, what it's like to go through training, and once you get out of and get your license, what you can do with it. We have another person who may or may not be able to join us today, named Andrew, who just finished his private pilot certificate and is working on his instrument rating. If he's going to be here, then we'll go ahead and introduce him when he joins.
I'm here.
Oh, hey, Andrew. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Good. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Andrew.
I'm Andrew. Recently completed my PPL. Right now working on getting my instrument add-on. I think I'm about like 4 weeks away from Checkride, and then just gonna keep working up. And then the end goal is commercial pilot.
Awesome. Well, it's good to have you,
not just CPL, commercial airline pilot.
Awesome. Well, it's good to have you, and we'll be bouncing some stuff off of Andrew as this goes along. Before we get into it, though, there's already a couple of questions. Most of them are sort of admin kind of stuff, so I'm just going to go real quick through the list and make sure we cover all of those questions. Michael asked, do you have a list or directory of CFIs that use simulators to teach? Yes, we do. We'll talk about it at the end, but for now, you can go to locator.redbirdflight.com and you can find all of the sims that we got out there. Can one initially work on their own with GIF program and a simulator? Yes, absolutely. We'll talk a little bit about that later. This will be recorded. We will post it to our website, landing.redbirdflight.com/webinars. It'll be on YouTube. You'll be able to get it for as long as YouTube exists and Redbird exists. So hopefully for a long time. This will be about an hour long. We'll see. We'll kind of plan it by ear how the conversation goes and how the questions go. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and move forward in our slide presentation here and give you just what we're going to talk about today. So starting off with, we've done our introductions. We're going to go through just like first steps and what you need to get in place before you really start. The key thing in my book is finding the right school, and so we'll probably spend a little bit of time on that. We'll do kind of a what do you expect, that kind of stuff, and we'll go through what the check rides like, the budget, all that kind of stuff, and what you can do with this after you're done. There'll be tons of time for questions. We'll pause as the questions come in. I'll have people ask, I may hand a question off to Andrew or to Eric or to Joey, but we'll get through this pretty quickly. All right, so let's move on. All right, we've done the introduction. So actually, I like this question. Eric, why did you, and this is my question, why did you want to become a pilot?
That's the age-old question, right? I think from the time I can remember, I was always looking up if I heard an airplane fly over. I mean, I've just always been fascinated by the idea that something heavy could stay in the air, and you could go places and you could see the world from above. It just seemed like such a cool idea. Nobody in my family was a pilot. I didn't know any pilots. I had a love for the idea of aviation. And like many, I lucked out in that I found mentors. I had people who sort of helped guide me down the road. But I think the simplest answer to that question is just the unbridled passion for it. Before I even knew what it was. I mean, I still look up if I hear an airplane fly over. The coolest part of it, I guess, it's sort of come around for me though, because now I hear an airplane and I look up and I look at the tail and it's got an eagle on the side of it, and I'm like, oh, it's one of mine. It's a very strange thing. I mean, I used to look up there and go, I wonder how you do that. And now I have, but any given time between 80 and 100 people doing it, and it's the craziest thing in the world to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. How about Andrew? How about you? Why did you want to be a pilot?
I feel like, well, it all kind of started back when I was younger. Ever since I was about 5 or 6, me and my family would travel to Mexico, and we'd always fly. And I always was fascinated by planes and how they worked, and it was something that was always like an interest towards me. And every time I got into that plane, I'd always read that little safety card. I'd just look at the little plane, and it kind of it really interests me. And as when I was around 14 years old, I started looking into it to maybe think of it as a career later in the future. And I realized, okay, the first steps I have to take is getting a private pilot license. When I was 15 years old, I had actually met somebody. So I used to work at a little grocery store, and I met somebody who had, I think it was a Boeing lanyard. And I asked him about it, and he ended up saying that, oh, he works at Rockwell Collins, and that he has his own plane. And then he said, if you ever want to go on a flight, let me know. And when I was 15, I took my very first flight with him, and it was in a Beechcraft Bonanza. And it was really cool. It really got me hooked into it. And then from there, I started to work my way up until finally being able to go to a flight school. So I think it was just always an interest in me. And then I kind of made that decision when I was about 16 or 17 that I wanted to become a pilot.
That's awesome. Good for you, man. Joey, how about you? What made you want to be a pilot?
Well, when I was about 6 years old, I went to my very first air show, and I fell in love with aerobatic flying, and I just caught the bug, and my whole life always wanted to be a pilot. And I've taken some aerobatic lessons since getting my pilot certificate, but definitely not going to be hitting the circuit.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, it's fun. So I grew up flying. My dad's a pilot. My granddad's a pilot. I married a pilot. Her dad's a pilot. It's sort of like in the DNA, and it was almost not a question. The question really was whether I wanted to be an airline pilot or whether I just wanted to fly recreationally. And it turns out I chose the option that most people didn't think existed. I went and worked in general aviation. So I'm around flying, but I don't fly for a living, and it's ideal. It's perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna launch a poll, and it's just straightforward. It's basically like, have you started flight training? Yes or no? And it'll kind of give us a little bit of a idea about what you've done, where you are in your training, and I'll just give this a couple of seconds to run, and then we'll move on, and we'll get into sort of the more meat and potatoes of this. Looks like by a pretty large margin, we have a lot of people that have not started flight training, which is awesome. So we'll go ahead and close it now. Okay. After 30 seconds, 29% said yes, they have started, and 71% said no. The question is, what do you mean by flight training? Sorry, I didn't get to that. I mean, have you been in an airplane with a flight instructor at any point? Introductory flight, whatever. But that's good enough information for us. That's great. We love to see people that are interested in aviation but haven't started yet, because I'm actually kind of jealous. I wish I was about to start my flight training. It's an awesome experience. It can be tough, but it's a good experience. So let's go ahead and start. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that first introductory flight. How important is the introductory flight, do you think, Eric?
So I may be a little bit biased on this, but I think this is everything. My introduction flight was not at the the beginning of my career pursuit of aviation. It was, oh wait, you can go to your local airport and get an airplane and people will let you fly it. I mean, it was still very out there, universal, nebulous to me. Like I didn't realize it was something I could really do. And I was 13 years old, so I mean, I had no idea what I was going to do. I did when I got done, though. I mean, as soon as the airplane left the ground, I was like, I actually looked over my shoulder to my dad, who was in the back seat, and I said, "This is what I'm going to do when I grow up." And my dad goes, "Great, turn around and fly the airplane." And so I think it's everything. I get a lot of people who come in to our college program. They come in for a tour, they're ready to sign up for classes, they're gung-ho, they're ready to go. And we ask everybody who comes in, have you done an introductory flight? And they're like, you can do an introductory flight? Like, yeah, so you're enrolling in a college degree program to become a professional pilot to fly professionally for the rest of your life, and you've never even been in a small airplane before? We should probably go do that. And when they realize that they can, right now, while they're talking about an airplane, go right down the hall and get an airplane and go on an introductory flight. Honestly, I think and I know we're not talking about the business of flight instruction, that's another webinar, but that is the beginning of the process. And I think so many schools skip over that, so many flight instructors skip over that awesome experience that is the first flight. But even as a college program, I won't let you enroll in my program until you've done an introductory flight. You don't have to do it with us, but we want you to do it with somebody. You have to go get in an airplane and see what this is about.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think we'll talk a little bit more about this in the choosing the flight school section, because that's really, I think, critical to like a successful outcome. But the orientation flight is both a really cool experience where you get to fly an airplane. Pretty much any place that you do it, if they're any good, you will fly the airplane on that intro flight. You might not land it, you might not take it off, but you will get a chance to fly it. It'll be a lot of fun. But it's also a really good opportunity to look at the school, what kind of equipment they use, how well it's run, and it gives you some insight into what kind of operation you're dealing with. And so
you're not just demoing flight, you're demoing flight training, you're demoing your instructor, you're demoing the school, you're demoing the airspace. Like, the whole thing is an introduction.
And I've always been of the opinion that you should do it at more than one place. I mean, it's $100 or $120 or whatever it is in most like private flight schools, but it counts. It counts as flight instruction. And I've seen people show up with 3 or 4 intro flights in their logbook, and I think that's great. They've done their due diligence, and they're looking for a good school. Does anybody, Joey or Andrew, do y'all have any intro flight experiences?
I don't. I kind of since I had already had a little bit of flying in the past, it was just more looking into what flight school pertained best to me at that point.
Yeah, I mean, you had an intro flight and a beach bonanza.
Yeah,
So that's
a pretty legit intro flight.
Yeah, that's good. All right.
I would add, just make sure you're comfortable with that person that you're taking that intro flight with. I know y'all all said that, but I would just like to reiterate that because you're going to be spending a lot of time in that cockpit with that person.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk some mechanics and logistics. Not there yet. Okay, so eligibility. I'm gonna defer to Eric, and he's.
Why am I getting picked on? That's you want me to talk about all the bad slides first? Is that okay?
I want you.
No, I mean, in all honesty, I mean, I had a pretty tough start at this because, again, I didn't know anything about flight training, and I was so young when I started. It became apparent that I could actually solo on my 16th birthday. So, my flight instructor's like, "Have you gotten an FAA medical certificate yet?" And I'm like, I don't know what any of those words mean when you put them together. I don't know what that is. So he referred me to an aviation medical examiner. I was like, "Oh, there's special people you have to go to do." Yes, there's a whole thing. There's an application you have to. Oh, okay. So I get to this exam, And I'd done sports, youth sports and stuff like that. I'd done physical exams before, but I guess no one had ever checked my color vision before. So I go to my first medical exam, and the examiner goes, so you're red-green colorblind, so you can't fly at night. I'm like, that sounds kind of important, though. I mean, if I want to do this for a living, though, I mean, right, I need to be able to fly at night. So there's this whole other process I had to go through to get mine. I actually had to do it twice because the night vision standards changed about halfway through my flight training process. So the first thing that pops up to me when we talk about eligibility is age, because that one got me, right? I assumed, well, let me just get a pilot certificate. I'm 16. Well, it doesn't work that way. At least not for a private pilot certificate. You can solo, you can be a student pilot and fly by yourself when you're 16, but you can't get the pilot certificate until you're 17. For those that are listening that are younger or who are talking to people who are younger, the minimum age could be a problem. And then the other big thing that sticks out for me is the medical requirement. I mean, I think a lot of people assume that it's like a car, or maybe they've heard some things about the FA's basic med program, which takes away some of the rigor of FA medical exams. But you still have to get one. You still have to get a medical exam. You still have to pass for at least third-class privileges to start. I would say for those that are thinking about aviation as a career, I see a lot of people go in and get the third-class medical because that's the minimum that's required. We recommend that all of our students go ahead and try to obtain a first-class medical certificate because you're going to need one to fly professionally anyway. You're going to want to find out if you have any medical conditions that are going to limit you later on. Be a real shame to spend that kind of money to get through your commercial multi-engine CFI training and then realize that you can't hold a first-class medical certificate for professional reasons. So age and medical are the first two that pop up for me.
Yeah, I'll add on to that just to state it clearly. To get your pilot's license, you have to have a student pilot certificate, at least an FAA third-class medical, and there's a third class, second class, and first class medical. Second class is required for commercial, and first class is required if you want to fly like in a scheduled airline, essentially. So what Eric's saying is go ahead and get your first class if that's your goal. They have different requirements and different renewal time periods and all that. And then you need you have to be 16 to solo, 17 to pass to take your private pilot check ride. The other we'll get into what is required to pass or to get your license, but I think a key thing is go get your medical like today. Maybe not today. I think a lot of medical exams.
Get off the webinar right now and go.
Yeah. If it's something you want to do though, like it's a first step. You really need to go ahead and do that and get it just out of the way, and then you can move on. And we'll talk about the written exam later, and I have similar feelings about that. But those are the sort of the straight eligibility requirements. So we'll I'm sure some more topics around this will come up, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. We got a couple of quick questions here. Does being a pilot pay well? Well, that depends. But yeah, it totally depends on a lot of it has to do with timing. So I'll give you a quick story. When I got my flight instructor certificate in 2006, I got it in 2006. I was eligible to get an airline job. I had 1,000 hours needed to get an airline job in 2007, and the economy was falling apart and nobody needed pilots. And so the base standards starting salary for an airline pilot 2007 was like $21,000 a year. I was making more as a flight instructor. Fast forward to five months ago, and those same airlines that were going to pay $20,000 in 2007, 2008 were paying like $70,000 for the first year when you include signing bonuses. And within 4 or 5 years, you could be making 6 figures pretty easily. If that's the route you go, a lot of it comes down to timing and seniority. And that's why if you'll see ads for different flight schools that are like seniority is the only thing that matters. And what that comes down to is pay and route selection and quality of life and all that kind of stuff. And so there can be some real advantages to getting it done. We'll see, honestly, after the industry's in a tremendous amount of turmoil right now. We'll see what becomes of that, but long term, there's still a demand for pilots. And so being a pilot can pay very well. And when you get really well, after you've been flying 12, 15 years, you're a captain at a major or something like that, you can make very good money and work relatively limited hours. There's also a ton of other career choices, right? I'm in aviation. I probably wouldn't have my job if I wasn't a pilot. And, I don't, so there are other like avenues in general aviation. Eric is a full-time flight instructor, administrator of a program, but he's probably not flying for a living. He's doing more admin for a living, but he's
I fly for fun now.
Exactly.
I did plenty of flying for a living, but it's nice to fly for fun again.
Yeah. All right. So the next question is, how often do you have to renew your medical? Depends on your age, on what your goals are. But let's say you're going to be a professional pilot. You need a first class medical. It's every 6 months, I think. If you're under 40 and you don't need a first class, then it gets a little like, if you have a third class medical, it's like every 5 years. If you're over 40, it's every years. And if you're just going to fly recreationally, you get your third class medical one time, and then after that you can do a basic med renewal where you never have to get your medical again. You can just you get a physical every 2 years, I think.
You see your local doctor. They sign off a form, yeah.
Yeah. So there's tons of resources out there around basic med specifically and how to manage your medical. But anyways, let's move on here. Finding the right flight school for you. All right, so this one is critical. So first off, I'm gonna plug the handout here. Somewhere in your GoToWebinar box console, there's a thing for handouts, and it'll say like 1 of 5 checklist choosing the best flight school. This is a checklist that we put together at Redbird. It's a PDF. Go ahead and download it, and it has a bunch of questions to ask. And the key thing is, you ask these questions, you don't really, a lot of them, there may be a good answer or a better answer, but a lot of them, it's more about how they answer than it is the specific answer to the question. So, flight schools are, for them, generally are a business of some kind. Whether, Eric's running a program inside of a public school, but he has, I'm sure he has sort of some financial targets he needs to hit and all that. And aviation is an expensive proposition for both the operator.
I'm still paying for fuel and insurance, just like everybody else, and staff and all that.
And so the flight school, when you're talking to a flight school, you have to recognize the fact that they're going to try to make a little bit of money from you, and that's an okay thing. If they don't make money from you, then they will go out of business, and there won't be another flight school anymore. But you want to make sure that in exchange for the money that you're giving them, whether it's at a business or at a college, that you're getting really good value for that money, that training was really good. So let me go ahead, and I'm gonna hand this over to Eric real quick. If you want to talk a little bit about what you would recommend people look for in a flight school, and keep in mind that he's biased and he's probably going to pitch his school, but whatever. I'm sure Polk State's good.
So the first thing, obviously, they have to have a Redbird simulator. See what I did there? You thought it was gonna be about me.
Yeah, that's good.
About you. We are friends. I promise. Really, we are. And so, I flew personally. I did my private pilot training one-on-one with a flight instructor in an airplane that we rented from our local FBO. Right. So very very custom tailored to the fact that I was 13 and then 14 and 15. It was custom tailored around the fact that I wasn't doing lesson 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 toward a career at that point. Then I went to a collegiate flight training program, which was incredibly standardized with a shortened time frame to complete training, within an academic semester. Then I went to work for a professional flight school in Atlanta, and also that's where I did all my corporate flying and all that stuff too. But that program, we could do sort of a custom tailored to the student thing, or we could also do the Part 141 accelerated standardized training as well. So it was sort of a hybrid type operation. And I mention that because every flight school is different. Every flight school will approach training in a different way. And to me, the first thing to look for is the school willing to talk to you about your goals and what you want to get out of training? The worst thing that I've seen in flight schools is the one size fits all, like, you're coming here, I'm going to tell you how to learn to fly. And I like to, even, we have a highly standardized curriculum, but I still like to see my students take ownership and accountability for their own instruction, right? And what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And we do, to the extent we can within the FAA approval that we operate under, try to custom tailor what we're doing to the individual student's needs, their what hurdles and obstacles they come up with during training. So I think that's the first thing. Is the school willing to treat you like a customer? Are they willing to treat you like a partner? And that's really, I think that's the first thing. Are they telling you, keep your mouth shut, do what I tell you, or are they trying to engage you in conversation and be your partner? I personally would only want to do business with the latter.
And I was joking, by the way. Eric runs a very, very well regarded, wonderful flight program.
Listen.
In fact, awarded, if I'm not mistaken.
We've won a couple of awards.
Yeah. Anyways,
I mean, obviously, I love what I do, or I wouldn't do it, right? But there are so many different options. I mean, I trained one-on-one with an instructor in a very unofficial way, and I loved that. I've done different kinds of training. I've talked to people who do different kinds of training. I don't think there is a one way that everybody should train. And I think it's important that people go into this knowing that you need to find the method that fits you. If your goal is not to find a career in aviation, I wouldn't recommend you go fly at a career academy. That's probably not going to be the kind of flying that's going to be fun for you.
Yeah, and I think that conversation about, are they willing to talk to you about what they do, and is it a conversation and not a sort of like a mandated program, I think is really critical. And we could do a whole webinar on the differences between a Part 61 flight training experience and a Part 141 flight training experience, and I'm just going to cover it really super briefly. Part 61 is, it's bad terminology, but it is official terminology, is an unapproved flight training program. That doesn't mean that they're illegal. It just means that I'm a CFI, so I'm certified flight instructor. I've taken a lot of training, gotten a class. I can get in an airplane with any student that I'm rated for and teach them without having to go through, get some specific FAA approval for that type of teaching. And that is under Part 61. Eric has a program that has a written out defined curriculum with like even facility requirements. He has to have this much space for each student, all that kind of stuff. He knows, like, at this stage, this lesson, this is what they're going to work on. The FAA comes out and looks at that and talks to Eric about it. Frequently looks at his pass rates and all that kind of stuff, and that is an approved program. So if you are, one of the main differences is Part 141 approved programs you can get government funding for. So you can potentially get loans for them. You can get GI Bill, VA paid training. It's also, if you do want a career in professional aviation, a lot of times those programs will get you done and in the right seat of an airline quicker. Part 61 can be a little more flexible, and so depending if you're working or whatever, 61 might be a better choice for you. And this is just painting in broad strokes here. Part 61 can be cheaper. So like 141, a lot of times it's a set price. It says it's like $50,000 for this, for a commercial pilot, or whatever the cost is, right? Part 61 oftentimes is paid in by the hour, essentially. And if you are really on top of it, if you study, you come in prepared, you can do it. You can get it done for less money. And we're going to have a conversation about the money part of it a little bit later. But there's a whole big topic there that we can talk about in a totally separate webinar. But at the end of the day,
maybe that's another webinar. We need to do this again.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you end up with a pilot certificate that is the same, right?
And even in a 141 school, just to throw this out there to talk about the hybrid model a little bit, we still do training under Part 61. For some students, it's better if you come in with prior training, because the 141 rules only let me give you credit for part of the training you already have if you transfer into my school. So for some schools, it's better for you, or some students rather, it's better for you if I train you under Part 61. And then what we do is to sit you down and explain, okay, this is where you're at, this is where you want to go, this is how long it'll take you to get there, and about how much money it'll cost. But you need to understand, if you go the 141 route, this is these are the things you get, like the restricted ATP endorsement, lowering the total time you need to go to work for an airline, whereas Part 61 is not going to offer you that benefit, but it's going to take you less time and cost you less money. And so again, going back to that whole finding the flight school thing, that's where it's important that you can have that conversation with your flight school. First of all, that they understand there's a difference, and second of all, that it's not just this is the shoe, put your foot in the shoe, but it doesn't fit, it doesn't matter, put your foot in the shoe.
All right, well, I apologize for this, but we're going to have to move a little bit quicker because apparently
we've got a little bit more to cover.
As a 4-part series. So I was going to have Andrew or Joey comment on this, but we'll get them in a second. Let's move on. There's I think the next topic, what to look for in a flight instructor. Joey, I know this is an important thing for you. Tell me about it. What do you look for in a flight instructor?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. It is really important. Like I mentioned earlier, you're going to be spending a lot of time with this person, so you just need to make sure that y'all have a good rapport with each other, that you respect them and you trust them, and that you feel comfortable enough to speak up and say, if you're insecure about some of your training, that you feel like you can talk to that instructor about that. Like if you're struggling in some area of your training, you just need to really know that you can trust that person, because you are going to have some hard times during your training. And the other thing I would say that I really benefited from is I remember learning landings, and my main instructor, he was, for whatever reason, he was great, but we couldn't, however he was teaching me landings was not going so great. So he got one of his buddies, flight instructors, and we went out, and I just heard it differently and learned it differently. And then, went right back to my main flight instructor. But that's also, something to consider, that like if you're struggling in something, then, talk through it and see if you can't get additional help. But, it's stressful and it's fun, and you just want to be able to celebrate and learn a lot. And so it's important that the personalities match.
Yeah, agreed. Andrew, do you have anything on the instructor front that you look for in a CFI?
I think the only thing that I kind of, because I've had 2 instructors so far. One of them actually had moved to the other campus in Florida. But one thing that I kind of noticed that was a little bit different of how they taught. One of them he was a brand new CFI, and the other one has about 1,400. And looking at those 2 CFIs, the one thing that I kind of look for now is somebody who is just kind of easygoing in the beginning of training, because my first CFI, he was new, and he kind of wanted me to pick things up like quickly and without really explaining many things. But then as I got into this new CFI, he really did start explaining more. And that's something that I kind of, at any point I was to switch CFIs, I'd want to look for somebody who was knowledgeable enough to kind of explain everything, because it really does make flight training a lot easier when you have somebody explaining it to you and saying, okay, this works like this because of this, and not just this works like this, and you just kind of memorize it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And let's this is time for some honest discussion about the systemic problems we have in flight training. The way people become airline pilots is they go to a school, they get their pilot's license, they get their commercial license, instrument, they get their CFI, and they have about 300 hours, let's say. They need anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 hours usually to get their next job in aviation. So they spend 700 to 1,200 hours flight instructing. And so they just got their licenses potentially like a couple months ago. And now they're flight instructing. And this is especially true in big programs that put out a lot of students. And they sort of create their own flight instructors. They teach them in that system. They know that system, and then they provide training to the next batch of students. And in a system like that, there is basic standardization. Everyone's going to be safe. In general, you're always going to get the information across, but though they are not professional teachers. The people that are flight instructing, your frontline teachers, are not professionally, like that's not what they want to do for a living. They are currently professional teachers, but not necessarily long-term professional teachers. Somebody like Eric has chosen to be essentially a professional teacher, an administrator, and there are plenty of instructors out there that choose to be full-time instructors. And in general, those people can be a little more patient, honestly, and are a little more concerned with good outcomes for the student versus building time. And you'll hear that phrase like time builder. They're just sitting there trying to keep from crashing and get enough hours to go to the airlines. In a good, well-run program, it's built so that you can put somebody who's really motivated around flight training time and still get good outcomes. But especially in an unstructured program, it can not necessarily be very beneficial. So when you're talking to your flight instructor, knowing their goals, and that's not to say every time builder is not a good teacher. Like some people just have a really good natural personality for it and it works really well, and other people want to do a good job no matter what their job is, even though they're only going to do it for the next year. So just because they're a time builder doesn't mean you're not going to get good training, but it's just something to be aware of. All right, I'm gonna we have a couple of quick questions. I'm gonna go through them real fast. If anybody, Andrew, Eric, Joey, wants to comment on them, just speak up. But which trainer aircraft should I be looking for? Seems steam gauges are cheaper versus G1000s are cost a little bit more. My answer to this question is whatever is available to, especially in the private pilot sense. I would probably, if I had the choice, both were available and they were both the same price. As a private pilot, I would probably choose the steam gauges. That this is very much about opinion, though. I know lots of people that are going to disagree with me on that. If you're going to be a professional pilot, you're going to have glass panel aircraft in your career. You'll get to them, and the truth is, the G1000, after you spend an hour figuring it out, is way easier to fly, especially on instruments, than a steam gauge airplane is, in my opinion. But when you're learning how to fly, you're in private pilot training, the most important thing you have is outside the cockpit, looking outside. And my experience has been, you have a big computer screen with lots of whiz wheel stuff on it, moving needles and bright colors. You're gonna spend a ton of time looking inside when you should be looking outside. So that's really the only reason I say that. That doesn't mean lots of people learn on G1000s all day, every day, and glass panel displays. It's not. It's kind of, it's almost a distinction without a difference. Like you can learn in both, find whatever's available to you and whatever you can get the most training value out of. And some people just want to fly the cool glass panel, and if that motivates you, then do it. That's okay. That is a fine reason to say, I'm going to choose G1000 because I think it's cool. That's fine. Go fly, enjoy yourself. And then Then another question, what's the hardest part of flying? That totally depends. The two things that private pilots struggle with almost consistently is landing. Getting the feel for that landing is a difficult thing, and talking on the radios. A lot of people get stage fright about talking on the radios. They push the button and they go, ah, they don't know what to say. So those, in my experience, have been two of the hardest things. If we had more time, we could have a whole long discussion, but we'll move on. You don't. And then this next slide is should be a quick one. Finding a Redbird sim, easy peasy. Locator.redbirdflight.com, and type in your zip code, find one. This is the plug. Redbird pays my paycheck. I've been with them for a long time. Big fan of their product. But we're going to talk about sims a little bit, and they are a great tool to use. And we can talk more about that, but I want to move on a little bit. Okay, mentors. Let's talk about mentors. I was lucky. I had a dad that was a CFI and actually did my instrument training, which I don't recommend, by the way. Receiving training from your father is rough, but when we were not in training, he's a great mentor. I have lots of other pilots. I'm well plugged into the aviation community. That is not the case for most people, or a lot of people when they get in aviation. And having a mentor, I think, can be really helpful. Some programs build opportunities to create that relationship. Eric, do you have anything you want to add on the mentor front?
I mean, like I said, when I started, I wouldn't be where I am if it hadn't been for my mentors. I didn't have anybody in my family who was into aviation. No one knew anything about aviation. We found out that, like, friend of a friend was flying. He was a captain for Continental at the time. That's a long time ago. But that was my only source of information about professional aviation. And then my dad found out that one of his friends that he knew was a pilot was actually a flight instructor, and he's the one who became my flight instructor. You should also not receive flight instruction from someone who grew up with your dad, because he will take out all of the pranks that your dad pulled on you in the airplane. But that was it. I mean, I can't speak highly enough about mentorship and flight instruction. You need a training friend, whether it's a partner that you're going through training with and you're holding each other accountable, or whether it's the experienced pilot, instructor, whatever, that can be the person who answers your questions or tells you, hey, you're not being crazy. This is hard. It was hard for me too. Shares experiences. I think that's that may be the most important part of continuing instruction. I think the passion for it is what gets you into it, but having that source of support is what keeps you in it, because it is expensive and it takes time and it takes a lot of personal accountability. Having that support system is essential.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so let's go on to our next real quick question. All right, so this is after we've chosen a flight school, we've gone a couple orientation flights, maybe we've decided on a professional program, we're going to go to Polk State, or we're going to go to another flight school, and we're going to, we're going to do training where we're going to do training. We're ready to get started. And let me just walk us briefly through, I will say, an average private pilot training experience and progression, what it looks like. Now, your mileage may vary. Lots of programs have some minor deviations from this, but in general, and this has basically been this way since World War II. And World War II is, by the way, interesting trivia, where this industry started. When we needed a bunch of pilots to fly fighters and bombers in World War II, they sort of created how flight training works. And in a lot of ways, we do it very similar. So you're going to start with basic flying, straight and level. How do I turn? How do I climb? How do I descend? There'll be a series of maneuvers that you do, and they're just made up. They're not actually what you do when you really fly in the airlines, right? But it's like steep turns and rectangular courses and turns around a point and all that slow flight and stalls and all that stuff. It's all fun and good, and you need to take them seriously. But at the what you're really doing there is you're learning how to control the airplane and all of its various phases of flight. You're learning how to divide your attention between control of the airplane and the situation around you. And those are the two critical core skill sets that you need. And we created a bunch of maneuvers. that help us practice those skill sets. And those maneuvers are on the Checkride, but they are not representative of what you will do as a pilot once you get your license. So you do those maneuvers, then you work on landings probably. Sometimes you work on landings while you do the maneuvers, sometimes you do landings, you know, it can be intermixed there, but in general, maneuvers, landings, and then you solo. You get to fly the airplane by yourself. It's an awesome experience. We'll talk about it on the next slide. And then you go into your cross-country training where you fly from point A to point B. You do a couple of those flights with your instructor. You do a couple of those flights by yourself. When you've done your solo, you move on to Checkride Prep and you get ready for your check ride. The FAA under Part 61 says you need 40 hours. Under Part 141, I think it's 35 hours of total training time. And then there's a whole bunch of requirements. You need 10 hours of solo, 50 nautical mile cross country, blah, blah, blah. Your instructor will walk you through all that. They'll make sure that you get all that check ride stuff taken care of. The key thing to remember though is your average pilot does it in 75 to 80 hours. Very few people get it done in 40 hours, especially in a Part 61 environment. In Part 141, you can get that number down because it's highly structured. You're probably flying a couple times a week, which makes that recency really helps a lot. And if you're smart, or your school's smart, you have a sim, preferably a Redbird sim, and you do some training in it, and you offload some of those extra hours that are really expensive into a much cheaper device that lets you get a lot of value for your dollar. Plug, check. Okay, so let's talk about that solo. We'll get to these questions after the solo. I think the solo is the fun one. So there's a lot of people, and I'm gonna said this before, but there are a lot of people that get their training, start their flight training, and they solo, and then they never come back because they flew an airplane by themselves. And I'd say it's not a lot of people. I'd say it's, you know, 10% of people in a Part 61 environment that get to solo, never come back. And that is totally okay. Soloing is an awesome experience. And if all you want to do is say, I flew a plane by myself, budget for it. Go into your instructor and say, I want a solo. That's my goal. And do it. It's awesome. It's a really cool experience. I vividly remember my first solo. I'm sure everybody does. So on that front, we're just going to talk quickly some story time because it's the best. It's like it's a top, you know, I have a kid. It's a top 2 or 3 day in my life, you know? So Andrew, what was your solo like, man?
My solo, I still remember it was like a beautiful day to go solo. Just did do you mean just the traffic pattern solo or the cross country solo?
Just your first solo, yeah, traffic pattern.
So that traffic pattern solo I was like very excited. I went up with my instructor 2 times, did 2 touch and goes, and he was like, all right, cool, do this 3 more times and you're good. And I said, okay. Well, of course it was gonna be full stops, not just touch and goes. But I remember the first time when I pulled back on the yoke, it just like it felt like really freeing. Like it was like really exciting. Like when I was like in downwind, I was like, wow, I'm like there's nobody here. Like I better land this plane. Like there's no other option. And I do remember like it was just like a really awesome experience. Like there's nothing that can really compare to that first time you fly a plane by yourself, because it really is also a really big confidence boost in your flying. Because up until then, I was like, oh, my instructor is probably flying for me. It's like maybe I don't know how to fly as well. But after that first solo, you kind of really figure out like, okay, I can do this, and it's really just it's an all like I don't know how to really explain that moment. It just is something that you'll never forget, and it was just you're full of excitement, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it's a really cool experience. Again, I apologize for the brevity here, but we're trying to move through some stuff. So I got a couple questions I'm going to go over real quick. How long are the results for the written exam valid? And briefly talk about this because we're going to get to the check right here in just a second. But to get your license, you got to have a medical, have a student pilot certificate, which are basically the same thing. You need you need to be 17 to take the check ride. You need to meet your aeronautical experience requirements, 40 hours in the airplane, 10 hours solo, blah, blah, blah. You need to pass an FAA written knowledge exam, which is a 60-question test. I think you get a 70 or higher, you pass. and it's like, if it's multiple choice questions. I think they're all multiple choice, and the truth is they are, well, it's a test. Pass the test. That's my piece of advice: is don't get too worried. It's not like some the Checkride. The oral exam is really what makes sure that you're going to be a good pilot. The knowledge exam is just another piece. It's not anything to get super stressed out about, but you do need to do it. I recommend people do it before they solo, like right away, because I think a lot of people delay it, procrastinate it, and then they end up ready to take their Checkride, but they haven't passed their written exam, and so they go back and they study and they get rusty, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, the question about how long does it last is 24 calendar months. So if, like right now, you're sheltering in place and you're at home and you take some written prep classes and you get really ready for it and you're ready to go, and as soon as the testing center opens, and on May 15th or whatever, or June 1st, whatever day, you go, you take it, you pass it, you have 24 calendar months, essentially 2 years, to take your private pilot Checkride, and that exam will still be valid. Okay, best way to start ground school, man, that's a huge question. If you don't know what flight school,
just start it. That's the main thing. Don't wait until the end.
Yeah, congratulations. So if you have a flight school in mind, call them, ask them what they recommend. They may have a course that they want you to take. If not, then I would probably go to something like Sporties or ASA and get a private pilot ground school course that's online and just start plowing through it. Okay, let's see.
And multiple methods are okay. Yeah. I have students who use, we teach Part 141 ground school. We're required to, it's a curriculum. We teach it in a classroom. Students will still buy one or two other online courses to study on their own. They may buy one or two different test prep options, like actual practice questions to go through, books, CDs. It's okay. You can use multiple methods too, and I would encourage that, because everybody learns the different way. Maybe you want to watch videos. Maybe you're somebody who really likes to read. Maybe you're somebody who learns better from practicing the actual questions, and that builds your confidence. So multiple options are fine.
Yeah. And then another question, which is an interesting one: are flight schools still open? Depends. So flight training is listed as an essential service. And so they are legally allowed to still be open. A lot of flight schools have chosen to close right now. Some are reopening. I know of a couple that reopened today. Others are delaying it. You're just gonna have to kind of check in your local area. But there may be two flight schools at an airport, and one's open and one's not. Okay, so let's, it looks like we still have a really good attendance rate, so I'm gonna say let's just plow through this and keep going. Okay.
When it's just you and me left, Josh, I guess we can stop. When it's just us and Andrew and Joey, I guess we'll.
Yeah, when we've talked everybody gets the call. This is a war of attrition here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the plateaus. Everybody has them. I grew up flying. I thought that I would sail through my private pilot training and be done in like 20 hours and just have to kill time until I got to 40 hours. And I hit a huge plateau around landing, because I had done everything in the airplane. I knew how the radios worked. I knew how to navigate all that, except I couldn't land because my dad had always landed. And it took me a long time, 10 hours of dedicated landing training to really get it down. And so everyone has plateaus. I think that's the first thing to recognize, is that you're going to go through them, and especially as you get into more advanced training, like instrument training and some of that stuff, you can definitely hit some plateaus where you take 3 or 4 lessons in a row and you feel like you're not making any progress. So let's start. Actually, Joey, if you want to talk to me about overcoming plateaus from your perspective, and then we'll go to you, Eric.
All right, well, I have kind of a funny story. I remember at some point during my training, it was probably pretty close to the end, I was really frustrated that I wasn't getting some concepts. And I just thought to myself, man, I'm not going to be able to do this. I can't do it. And at the time, I was working around a bunch of pilots. And so I would talk to them about like different plateaus, or I mean, different issues that I was having, and they were super helpful and super thankful and for their insight. So really reaching out to people and learning how to get through things. But I also remember telling myself, well, if they could do it, I could do it. So when you're really frustrated, just go find a friendly pilot to talk to, and you can realize, oh, okay, this is not rocket science. I can just work hard and concentrate and overcome that plateau, and you can do it.
Yeah, Eric, what do you have on plateaus? What do you counsel students on with?
Well, I gotta admit, first of all, to my own. So I was deathly terrified of stalls. Like, I mean, to the point of like PTSD nightmares after lessons where I was forced at instructor gunpoint to do stalls. And I managed to sort of fake my way through it, I guess, to get through private. I never really understood the mechanics of a stall. I never really understood the mechanics of a recovery from a stall. And I managed to keep that a secret through my instrument training and into my commercial training. And so I'm doing commercial pilot training. I'm holding this big secret back that I've just, if I happened to recover from a stall, it was a total accident. And I'm flying around in the Cessna 152, which is probably the least happy airplane to stall. Well, their Tomahawks are way worse, but I mean, the 152 does not like it. Well, it likes to stall. It doesn't like to stall nice. So I'm flying around with my instructor, dropping wings. He's having to take over. The airplane's just falling. And so it's like, what is wrong with you? You're a pilot. I'm like, I've got a secret. You know, I'm terrified of stalls. He goes, well, we're going to fix this. So we had two 150 aerobats, which is basically the same thing, but an airplane that was specifically designed for light aerobatics. And so we go up in this airplane, and he's like, we're going to spin. I'm like, no, we can't. I'll die. He goes, no, we're going to spin. And he goes up and he demonstrates spins for me first. And I'm freaking out. My heart's beating out of my chest. I stop breathing. The wing sort of tilts over. We're looking at the ground, and I was just like, "This is it?" He goes, "Yep, this is it." I'm like, oh. So like my stomach didn't come out. No, it's a 1G maneuver. It looks a little weird, but it's not. There's nothing to it. So my entire fear of the whole thing was completely illogical and based in a fear of something I didn't understand. And so I learned a lot from that experience. First of all, to not be satisfied with things I didn't understand in aviation. And that has served me well throughout my entire career. If you don't understand it, or you don't know, or you've forgotten, stop what you're doing and go figure it out. It'll make you a better pilot. It'll definitely make you a better flight instructor. Faking it is not going to work long term. I made it a long time. I mean, I made it to what, 100 and something hours, 120 hours before my secret came out that I was terrified and no good at stalls. And to this day, the number of students I have had to take up and spin, I think it's my karma, but the number of people I've had to do the exact same thing to because they were terrified of something they didn't understand. Yep. However, as an instructor, it also taught me how to find those things, how to look for those things in students. And I think that's the big deal. I would tell anybody, the first piece of advice is don't accept, well, I'm not going to get this. Yes, you will. You just have to go and seek the information. Joey mentioned different instructors. Yep. You know, in a larger flight school, you've got the benefit of a ton of knowledge and information. And flying multiple lessons with multiple instructors is okay. I encourage my students to do that. Everybody's standardized to the curriculum. Lesson 4 is lesson 4. It doesn't matter if you fly with me or anybody else. It's the same lesson. So I would encourage that. I think that helps a lot with plateaus. But the main thing, just stop stopping. Like stop, like, oh, that's it. I'm not going to get it. No, you will. But everybody has these plateaus. Your friend who told you that they sailed through training, it was a piece of cake, they had training plateaus. Everybody does. I've yet to meet somebody who doesn't hang up on something.
And one of the things that I really, really love about aviation, and is kind of becoming somewhat unique in our culture, is that you have true ownership of your flight. When you're a pilot in command, you are the final authority as to the operation of that airplane. And if you take the mentality that I'm going to be the pilot in command of my training, that I'm going to take ownership of it, and my CFI is a resource for me and is the person that's going to help me get there, but they don't own my training. And so I'm not reliant on my CFI to get me there. My job is to get the information and expertise out of my CFI so that I can be a better pilot. I think that depending on your personality type, that can be a really motivating thing. And it was for me. We'll go back to having your dad as your flight instructor for your instrument rating. And when I finally took ownership of, this is my instrument rating, this is my flight training, and when I'm flying, I'm the pilot in command, and I need to ensure that I get the information that I need. And if I have a question, I'm going to ask it until I get an answer that makes sense to me. I think is a really powerful mindset that can really help you through this. All right, so let's, we got some motivational, you've got this. You've got this. Okay, so let's talk about the Checkride and how to prepare for it. So a Checkride, private pilot Checkride, it's a little dependent on where you do it. So Eric, do you guys have self-examining authority?
No, it's really, really difficult to get.
Yeah, it is.
You've got some legacy 141 schools, some really old ones that still retain examining authority. But by and large, I think most of us in the collegiate aviation world, even huge monolithic schools, will only have examining authority for certain checkrides. It won't be for everything, but no, we don't. We use designated pilot examiners.
Yeah. So okay. So the most places use something called a designated pilot examiner to give a checkride, and that is a private individual who the FAA has knighted and said, you, sir or ma'am, are allowed to give pilots their certificate. You can go out and give private pilot check rides, instrument check rides, whatever, and say, certify that this person is good enough to be a pilot. The check ride itself has got two components. There's an oral component where you get to sit down in a room and the DPE asks you questions. And then there's a practical component where you go out in the airplane and you do some maneuvers. This is all governed by a document called the Airman Certification Standards.
There you go.
Yeah, ACS, and there's an ACS for private, there's an ACS for instrument, commercial, and blah, blah, blah. And theoretically, everything that it could be on your check ride is in there. It's written in a way that it's intentionally broad to give the DPE some discretion, but there is an objective standard. It's not just like, does your DPE like you or not? It's supposed to be more objective than that. There's a series of maneuvers you have to fly. There's a series of knowledge areas that you have to know about. And one of the things, the kind of the natures of this system is that DPEs are generally bound to geography. So like Eric probably has 3 or 4 DPEs that he uses at his school, because those are the area that they're in his area. When I was full-time instructing in Manassas, we had 3 DPEs that I would schedule people with, and you get to know your DPE. You say, this person cares about this person cares about that. That's not to say that you just teach to the test. Like, the instructor also endorses their logbook and says, I think this person is capable and competent to be a pilot. Not in those terms, but essentially that's what the endorsement means. But you also prepare them for the for the check ride. And a lot of it is the instructor. The instructor has to know the DPE, and in a good program, they'll have a very extensive pre-check ride checklist that they go through and say, we've covered this, we've done this, we've done this. And one of the key things about the private pilot certificate is that it's a license, the cliche is it's a license to learn, because aviation is an immense topic. Going out flying a private plane through the National Airspace System is a huge thing. I mean, it's amazing. And you're not going to learn everything you like need to know in 40 hours. You're going to learn everything you need to know to not crash, right? To keep yourself safe in 40 hours. But there's still so much more that can be learned, and you can still get better and better and better as you go on. And so that pilot certificate is really a license to say you can go out there and learn now. Go out, fly by yourself, learn, get into the system, and hopefully get more ratings. How do you prepare students for check rides, Eric?
So I would go back to the checklist thing first, because I think obviously the training and the requirements are all written, they're known, and the student and the instructor are both equally accountable for making sure that all the standards have been met. You know, occasionally you'll get a student who comes to because incrementally during our training, we have stage checks where you're flying with not your instructor, you're flying with a much more senior flight instructor who is not acting as an instructor on that lesson, he's acting as an evaluator. So I'm not providing you instruction, I'm saying do this maneuver. You do it, I tell you if it was satisfactory or not. If it wasn't, then the evaluation's over and you have to do it again. So I mean, it's like by the time you take a private pilot check ride in my program, you've already taken 4 miniature check rides anyway. So you have the experience of being evaluated. And whether you're in a 141 or 61 environment, I would encourage you to approach training in that way. You can't spend your entire training process just training, because then you're going to show up for the check ride and it's a completely different situation. The examiner's not there to teach you something. They're just going to ask a question and sit there and wait for you to give an answer. I think that's the first thing. When it comes to determining readiness for a check ride, I would encourage everybody to have a multi-step process for doing that. I think the student is the first person who is responsible. It's your license, it's your certification. So you need to do your own logbook audit, go through, make sure that you've met all the requirements. Then you're going to complete that same process with your flight instructor before they give you the endorsement to take the check ride. Okay, so that's an extra step. In my program, in a Part 141 program, there's usually going to be somebody above that person, a check instructor or a chief instructor, who's going to review it as well. By the time someone takes a check ride at Polk State, the student has done their own logbook audit, the instructor has reviewed it and signed off on it, the assistant chief has signed off on it, and the chief instructor as well. So it's a 4-step process to be able to get to the examiner, in making sure that we've covered everything. We have all the documentation, the airplane's airworthy, we have all the paperwork that we need, because you don't want to schedule an appointment with an examiner. You're going to be nervous. I've taken way too many check rides, and I still, as a chief instructor, I still have to do them every year anyway. And I'm not like freaking out, having a panic attack, but there's nerves that come into that, right? You don't want to go into that experience and then realize that you're missing one of your cross-country flights, right? Because you really should have known that in advance, and that's going to put a sour taste in the DPE's mouth as well. Like, how did you not know that you didn't meet the eligibility requirements?
Yeah. So let's move on. There's some questions that have piled up, and I'm going to answer those in a second. I think we've done that guy. Trust your flight instructor. I think
Unless it's Josh. I mean, obviously don't trust Josh, but
yeah, never trust Josh. Okay, we're going to talk about budget here in a second, but first let me get to a couple of quick questions. So we have Camden. I'm only 12. I've done Eagles, basic lessons. Do you have any instructions for what to do while I wait to get old enough for flight school? Can I go to some flight school? So you can go get your glider rating, which is awesome. I highly recommend it. You get that when you're 14. You can take your, well, you're 12, so wait, don't take it yet. But when you're 15, take your private pilot written exam, so you can start studying for that. You can take lessons now. You just can't solo till you're 16. You can't get your check ride until you're 17. But honestly, what I would recommend, if you were my child, I would say let's go get a glider rating, because that could be a really good foundational thing. And if you're interested in it, it builds a nice skill set, and it keeps you flying. And then you can move on to the written stuff, or the
good for you, man. Good for you. Like keep the fire alive. I mean, there's plenty of YouTube videos, plenty of ways to hang out at the local airport. And again, I started flying when I was 13. The day after my 13th birthday was my first flight. And normal kids got an allowance. I got an hour of flight time a month. And if I wanted more, I had to work for it. So, I mean, work for it, do it, man, and you'll love it. Good for you.
What's the best way to integrate sim into flight training? Go through GIFT on your own and then hire CFI, do sim with CFI, then, okay. So there is another webinar about this that's really tailored for flight instructors and how to integrate GIFT into it. In general, I would say GIFT specifically is a product that Redbird makes. Let me back up. Guided Independent Flight Training is a product that Redbird makes that works in our flight simulators to help you get your license with quicker, less money, essentially. It was designed with the idea that you would be working in tandem with a CFI. So let's say you were doing the lessons on steep turn. The CFI might demonstrate a steep turn to you in the simulator or walk you through it at least, and then you would fly it with GIFT until you got a certain score, and then you move on to the next lesson. So it's designed to be tandem, where GIFT is where you practice and perfect things, but the instructor is still doing some introduction and then checking on your progress and performance as you move on. So I would not recommend separating them, like doing GIFT first and then a CFI. I would ideally say move through it and in tandem. This is a question for you, Eric. Is the bulk of ground school spent on weather and airspace?
No. So that's a tough question.
Sort of.
So the knowledge test map, meaning like how many questions get asked on every topic, is a known thing. But the FAA release, that's part of what the Airman Certification Standards process did when we converted from practical test standards to Airman Certification Standards, was to really take a look at the knowledge testing process, make sure we were asking legitimate questions, not like how many satellites from the GPS constellation. Well, that depends on how many are operating and how many we've launched recently. I mean, that's not a reasonable question, but it was something somebody lifted out of a book once, right? So the entire purpose of the ACS is to map the test to make it applicable to what you're actually doing in your training. So for private pilot, well over 25% of the exam is going to be regulations. All right, so you know that going into it. Like a quarter of the exam is just rules, okay? And then aircraft systems and all the other things are mapped accordingly, okay? But regulations is the biggest part. So when we build ground school curriculum, we don't really build the time we spend on topics to the amount of stuff that's covered on the exam. We build the curriculum based on how much time does it take to get an idea through to a person. And let me explain what I mean by that. For me to stand in a room with you and read regulations to you is the most torturous, horrible thing that can be done to a student pilot. You can read regulations on your own. It's public domain, it's on the internet. You can read regulations all you want to. I'm not going to spend 15 hours in ground school reading regs to you because you can do that on your own. I'm going to spend a lot of time taking apart attitude indicators and talking about how they work. I'm going to take the time in flight planning. And well, yes, you could draw a straight line between these 2 points, but is that really the right way to go? There's another airport here in the middle. You've got all this flight training going on over here. Maybe that's not the safest route. I'm going to spend the time talking about the stuff that's going to make you more successful as a pilot, not necessarily what's going to be asked the most on your knowledge test. Okay, yep. If for that, there are specific knowledge testing prep programs that are for that purpose. Real ground school is intended to make you a better pilot. I'm not saying either one's better than the other. You should really do both. But ground school is based on teaching someone important things. Knowledge test preparation is how much stuff do I have to know to pass the test?
Well answered. All right, so here's the big question. It's on the slides right now. How much does it cost to become a pilot? So, and this is very much depends. A, what do you define as a pilot? Is it just to get your private pilot's license or your sport pilot's license or your recreational license? Is it to get enough flying experience and ratings that you can go fly your family from point A to point B comfortably? Maybe you need an instrument rating to do it. Or is it to become a professional pilot and go work for American Airlines or Delta or somebody? And it depends on where you are, what type of training you want to do. But all that said, I'm a ballpark. $10,000 to $15,000 for a private pilot's license in a Part 61 training environment is what I have seen as the average. A lot of that depends on how you show up, how much prep work you do on your own. But if a friend came to me and said, I want to go fly and I want to get my private pilot's license, how much should I budget? I would tell them $15,000. They may, in likelihood, they might have some left over. If you want to be a professional pilot and you want the whole kit and caboodle, I don't know, that range is probably 70, 55 at the very low end. 70 is probably average, up to 90 or 110 depending on where you're going. And that doesn't include, if you went to a 4-year university, that doesn't include your degree. So Eric, what do you have on budgeting? What else do you add?
Yeah, when it comes to Part 61, so I did my training over 5 years and it took me 98 hours. Right? I mean, that's not normal, but it's because I spread it out over 5 years and I flew 1 hour a month. So I know it sounds crazy, but if you will fly more, it will cost you less. It's a physical skill, right? So like the more you do it, the more proficient you get at it, the faster you get to a point where you can take the Checkride. For me, every lesson was like starting over again, so it took a lot longer. But then when I got to my structured collegiate program, I was within $500 to $1,000 of the amount, the recommended amount every semester, because it's so structured and so standardized that you're flying 3 times a week, 4 times a week, and you're just really at it. And you're backing up simulation with what you're doing in the airplane. Even then, this was way before Redbird, so like rudimentary, basic, very basic simulation, but still, it's always been useful. I agree with Josh on the 61 numbers. I mean, obviously we track that stuff, so I can tell you that the average person at Polk State College is going to spend $10,800 on their private pilot certificate. Now, some spend more, some spend less. Our average completion time for private is 48 hours, which is way below the national average. But we do it a very specific way, and that won't work for everybody. If you need to work an 8 to 5 job Monday through Friday, my program's not an option for you, because we're going to make you fly all the time. So it's again, it goes back to what flight school am I flying with, what am I trying to get out of it, and what does my life require when it comes to training. That's why it's an open-ended question.
Yep. Okay, so quickly, loans and scholarships. I'm actually going to have Joey talk about this because she might know some more about it. There are loans, there's scholarships, there's lots of ways to pay for this. Joey, what do you have to add on here?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. So I would recommend, depending on your age, if you're a teenager looking to go to study in school and college, there's a resource called the University Aviation Association. They have a scholarship guide that you can see what schools are providing scholarships and what companies in the industry are providing scholarships for students. So you can reach out to me. Actually, I'm happy to help you get that, or just Google the University Aviation Association, and they'll send that information to you. There's also Women in Aviation. You don't have to be a woman and you don't have to be a pilot to be a member of that organization, but they provide a lot of scholarship opportunities through their partnerships. So check out what they have. And then the EAA and AOPA are also some larger organizations that have some funding available and scholarships, and not just for teenage age, but also for those of you that are 40 and looking for to take your first flying lessons. And we have a whole list of those resources. So if you are interested in that, just email us at info@redbirdflight.com and I'll send that over.
Okay, thanks, Joey. All right, so the next topic I want to touch on briefly is how does a Redbird, or really, let's be honest, any simulator, reduce your costs? Redbird does it much better, and it'll be a much better experience, and you should definitely get a Redbird. But past that, simulators are used extensively in professional training. An airline pilot goes to training when he or she says that they are going to a simulator, almost exclusively. They're not going to an actual airplane. It's relatively recently, like in the last 10 years, that simulation has become a huge part of training further lower down in the pipeline. And Redbird's been a big part of that, and especially in private pilot training. The basic mechanics of it is that the simulator is cheaper to operate and fly than an airplane is, significantly cheaper. So there's just a straight cost analysis there. There's also the simulator is a really good place to learn something because you can pause, you can isolate specific maneuvers, you can start in the air, you don't have to taxi and take off and do all that stuff, waste a bunch of time. And you can repeat stuff. You can, let's say you're working on landings, you can start, or working on stalls, whatever it is, you can just start, repeat, start, repeat, start, repeat. And so outside of the cost savings, it can be a really valuable tool to train. We at Redbird had a flight school in San Marcos, Texas that we ran for a while that was heavily integrated simulator training into the program. And we were doing, our average pilot graduated with like 35 hours in the airplane and 32 hours in the simulator. And we put a ton of time in the simulator, and it really made a huge difference on their costs. We were offering licenses at a fixed fee for $9,500. And our average cost to deliver that was probably somewhere around $7,000, $7,500. So, it was good for the student, it was good for us. So simulator can help. That said, you can use a home sim. You can set up Microsoft Flight Sim on your computer at home and a little plastic yoke, or a Redbird alloy yoke if you want, and you can fly that, and that'll help. The higher, the more accurate the device is, the more feature-rich the device is, the better your experience you're going to have, the better training you're going to get. But that doesn't mean that a $20 copy of Microsoft Flight Sim and a $100 yoke won't provide some value for you. Okay, and I know Andrew, like basically everybody on this call is, Andrew trained at a school that uses Redbirds a lot, and Eric is a customer, owns several Redbirds, so we could probably give a webinar on just how great we are, but I don't want to do that. So we can move on. Let's talk a little bit. I think we can go through. I think Eric's going to have to leave us here shortly, so let me crank through some of these slides just to make sure. So you pass your check ride, and you now have a pilot certificate. You need to fly. Either you continue your training, or you need to fly fairly frequently to keep moving. Honestly, I think we're probably going to end. We're just going to answer some questions here because there's a whole bunch of stuff that we could probably spend another hour talking about being a proficient pilot, and that's on the website too. And maybe we'll do a whole webinar on that. But we're coming up on an hour and a half, so I don't want to take too much longer. So I'm going to answer.
What I have learned from this webinar is that we need to have a lot more webinars.
Yes, we do.
It's killing me. I'm trying to keep it like.
Yeah, I know.
Don't talk about everything you want to talk about.
Okay. There's some questions here that I'll answer once Eric leaves. I just want to see if there's anything that would be good for Eric to. I won't do that.
I don't like where this is going.
Okay, so I think let's go ahead. Eric, thanks for having us, or thanks for being on the call. I don't think there's any questions that are specific for you. Andrew, if you need to jump off as well, we really appreciate it. We'll probably schedule another one of these because I think there's just so much to cover here that we can keep going. So
let's
thanks.
Do it again sometime. I really appreciate the invite, and it's been a lot of fun.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go through some of the questions that have sort of stacked up here, and then we'll call it a day. All right. Difference between a pilot certificate and instrument rating. A pilot certificate gives you something like, I can fly a single engine land airplane, or I can fly a single engine land airplane for pay if I'm a commercial pilot. An instrument rating adds the ability to fly under instrument flight rules to a pilot certificate. So it's an additional privilege, but it doesn't add a category or class. That's a very technical definition, but unfortunately that's what it is. Once you get a glider's license, what should you do when you get a glider license? You should fly gliders because they're a lot of fun. And then if you want to continue on, you can go and get your pilot's license, your private pilot's license. Glider flying is very much about fun, enjoying the experience. There are very few people who make any money as glider pilots, maybe glider instructors. Okay, a list or directory of CFIs. Again, that's at locator, that CFIs that use simulators to teach. I would go to locator.redbirdflight.com and type in your zip code, and there'll be a whole bunch. Good books to learn the vocabulary of flying, etc. I would actually start with the FAA material, because the FAA has a bunch of material that they've published, written and published, that is free. You can go to the FAA website and download it. Start with like the Aeronautical Information Manual. It's called the AIM. It's got all kinds of stuff. It's got a pilot controller glossary that goes through and lists every word that you would use while you're talking on the radio, and what the meanings are and all that kind of stuff. There's also like an airplane flying handbook. There's an instrument procedures handbook. There's airman knowledge handbook. All of that stuff is free, and you can download a copy of it. You can go to a website like pilot shops, and they will sell it to you as a bound version if you want to read the paper version. But if you don't, if you want to, you can read a digital copy for free. After that, there's a lot of providers of courseware. Sporties, ASA, Gleim, Jeppesen, all provide, King Schools, all provide courseware and books around being a pilot. But I would start with the FAA stuff because it's free and it's usually not pretty bad. What are the risks of flying? Okay, lots. Flying is a potentially dangerous activity, and that's why being a pilot and learning to fly is such a big responsibility. It's something you need to take very seriously. I think the risks of flying are you can crash and die. That's at the end of the day, and you could do damage to other people on the airplane or people on ground, and so it's something you need to take very seriously, but it's a manageable risk. It's a risk that can be, with training and good judgment, can be managed. So I think it's important to take it seriously. Flying jobs what kinds of flying jobs are the best path to becoming an astronaut? All right, so you want to be an astronaut. Traditionally, the way to do that is go be a military pilot. And this is a little bit outside of the scope, but your traditional, when it was the space shuttle, you had 2 or 3 people that were crew, that there was like a pilot and a commander, and then you had missions payload specialists that were scientists. So if you want to be a scientist and get in, that's a way to do it. If you want to be like crew, I want to be a commander of a mission, be an astronaut, then it's generally military pilots are generally the best path to that. Not the only path, but the best path. With the new program, I don't know, honestly, SpaceX and all that. I think that you're still probably, you would not be misserved by going to be an Air Force fighter pilot or a Navy fighter pilot. Those are, generally speaking, the kind of people that get picked in the astronaut program, but there are very, very few astronauts. So maybe find a backup plan B just in case. I'm not saying you can't do it, but a plan B might not be a bad idea. Okay, what does taxi mean? Taxi is what we call maneuvering on the ground. So it's going from the parking spot to the runway. That whole process is called taxiing. Airplanes are weird because they don't have like wheels that turn generally, or they don't work. They don't have like a steering wheel that you turn on the ground. In the air, you have a yoke that you turn, but on the ground, you usually steer with your rudder pedals. So it can be kind of a challenge. You steer with your feet. But taxiing is just maneuvering on the ground. All right, we have let's see. So we have someone who's interested in going to, wants to get his private pilot's license at a regional school and then attend Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University for the rest of my training. Whether or not I should get my instrument rating before Embry-Riddle, that's up to you. I don't know enough about Embry-Riddle's course catalog to say one way or the other. I will say that generally speaking, if you're really diligent, you could probably do it, your flight training, for a little less money at places outside of Embry-Riddle. But Embry-Riddle is a great program and a great place to be, to get your training done. It's one of the best programs in the country. How long are you able to keep flying? So there's no age limit as far as having your certificate. If you're flying for the airlines, you have to retire when you're 65. But if you're flying, you could fly for fun until you can't pass until you're medically not able to do it, until you're unhealthy enough or you get old enough that you really can't do it. Best aircraft to start flight training in, again, whatever's available. Find something that you can afford, that's close by, that you can get access to. That's the best plane. The plane that's there is the best plane. There's lots of arguments you can have about this type of airplane or that other type of airplane, but at the end of the day, find the one that's available. Okay. And what's the most important rule of flying? Airspeed and altitude are your friends. So it's probably something around judgment. Like if maybe it's takeoffs are optional, but landings aren't. So you can always choose not to go flying. If the weather, how you're feeling, the airplane doesn't look right, whatever, just don't go. You know, that's probably the most important thing. Can I be a private pilot and Air Force pilot at the same time? Yes, absolutely. When you go through training in the Air Force, you do not get your FAA certificates by default, I don't think. But it's a pretty easy transition. And so I know lots of people that either do it when they retire, they get their FAA certificates, or they do it during the process of while they're there. While they're going through the training, they'll do the quick add-on to get their FAA certificate. The types of flying are very different, but you know, the airplanes fly the same actually. At the end of the day, physics is the same. All right, so I think that's all the questions we have. Oh, we have one more. What age should I be to get my medical test? The medicals are 5 years if you're under 40. So I would do it, you know, do it before you start your training, honestly, if you can, but not years and years before you start. So if you can't solo until you're 16, so maybe when you're 15, you could get a medical, or you know, something like that is probably a good way to do it. And I think that is all the questions that we have. Based on everyone being here and the attendance and everything, I think we'll do another one of these, maybe on a slightly different topic, but we really appreciate you joining. Joey, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Nope, but thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thank you for being on. Andrew, do you have anything?
There's just one thing that it was kind of from way back, kind of deciding if you should train in a six-pack or a glass cockpit.
Yeah.
The way, like in my flight training, I had actually started in a Archer standard six-pack, right? And it was really great because you kind of figure out how everything works, because a lot of at least what I saw in my PPL check ride, he did ask about like six-pack things and how they work. So it was really good, like knowing the fundamentals of how they work. And then right now I'm just in a glass cockpit, and it really does kind of help having that basic information of how a six-pack works. I think if I could do the PPL again, I would have chosen to do everything in a six-pack. Just because it's if you're gonna go out and rent a plane, most planes that you rent are gonna have a six-pack. Not too many, especially in what I've seen in the Texas, Austin area. There isn't too many planes that are gonna have G1000s that you can rent at a price that you're gonna want it, because you're gonna want something, you're gonna want to rent it, and you're gonna want something that's gonna be a little bit cheaper, more efficient, bang for your buck, you could say. And so if you have that basic understanding of how a six-pack works and pretty much you're comfortable with how you use it, it's going to help you in your training, and then also it's going to keep you safer if you end up going and renting a plane and such.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Well, I think that'll wrap us up for today. We really appreciate everyone staying on the call. I know it ran a little long, but this will be recorded. This has been recorded. It'll be on our website. You'll be able to watch it anytime, scrub through it, rewind, fast forward, all that. So thanks again, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar.
Thank you.